somebody said on our podcast once before, they said the human body owes it to nobody to make any sense. I was like, what a hell of a quote, man, because
Yeah.
it just seems to do the opposite almost of what you intuitively would think. And the first thing that comes to mind when people hear about the sugar diet, and of course, when people see the candy and so forth, they think about diabetes. And there's a lot of people that have diabetes, or they're like pre-diabetic. People are on medications, they're on metformin or insulin. And I have a lot of people hitting me up saying, hey, is this good for me? And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, yo, I'm not a physician,
Mm-hmm.
but at least some of my brief understanding of some of this stuff is that it could be potentially great for somebody who's diabetic. Can you explain some of the reasons on why
Mm-hmm.
looking into a diet like this might be a good idea for someone with diabetes?
Yeah, so I'll start with like the main thing that I think is a misconception with diabetes and insulin resistance is that is caused from eating too much carbohydrate or too much sugar, and so you need to stop eating those foods if you want to heal. It's really not that simple, but there's two ways that you can become insulin resistant: too much fat in the tissue or overexposure to insulin and glucose. However, the second requires a massive amount of glucose and insulin in order to make that happen. There's a study where they had to do a hyperglycemic clamp, an infusion of glucose for 24 to 36 hours before they were able to see the insulin resistant effects of having the exposure to glucose and insulin. That's not relevant in a normal physiological sense, right? Like nobody's eating constant carbohydrates to the point that they're elevating their blood glucose for 3 days straight. Where that matters more is when you're not processing insulin well, and your your liver is not sensitive to insulin, so it doesn't hear that there's glucose in the blood, and it keeps pumping out glucose. So now we're creating a situation where 24/7 your blood glucose is elevated because the liver is pumping it out. And so because we're creating that state, now that's similar to that research that I was talking about. But if you think about it this way, insulin, if you can raise your glucose through a high carbohydrate meal and then allow it to come back down by the power of insulin, I kind of see that like the glucose metabolism muscle, and you're training it in that moment. And so you're actually getting stronger and lowering your glucose. There's these studies where they built the people up to something like 80% of the diet was carbohydrates. They started with mostly glucose, and after 10 days found massive improvements in insulin sensitivity. Then they did that with sucrose, which is, glucose and fructose, what we're eating on the sugar diet and things like that. And they found an even more pronounced effect on that. And so there is definitely a lot of potential here in this diet for healing from diabetes. I've had people, I'm working with one guy right now who his fasting glucose is insanely high, and he's doing mostly sugars, and it's just coming right down. Like weekly, we're seeing the numbers dropping and dropping and dropping. So it's definitely something to be aware of. Like, I don't want to tell anyone who has a disease state that, just jump into an extreme diet and you're going to be fine. Like, obviously, my entire thing with this is you got to try it for yourself. You got to experiment. You got to take it slow, be smart, look at your data and figure out, is this working for me? Am I moving forward? Do I need to change something up? Because even with a diet like this, there are these weird sticking points that some people run into, whether it's innate to their own physiology or whether it's something that they're just missing a nutrient or something like that.
Yeah, it is interesting how, regardless of dietary intervention, how you can still run into these sticking points. You can still run into just this, you're trying to get the scale to go down. And it's quite obvious, if you've been working on weight loss for a long time, like there's so many people that are in so many different spots in their journey. But for myself, I used to be 330 pounds. And then I got down to maybe like 270 and 260 and so forth. And then eventually down to like 240. And going from 240 down to, I'm trying to go down to 200, and I weigh around 210 right now. Mm-hmm. Going from 240 to 210 has been exponentially way harder than all the previous weight loss combined.
Yeah.
I mean,